Good evening, guys. I wanted to talk about something that I find to be a very big issue in Kansas City that not a lot of people are talking about or are aware of, and that is the murder rate, the crime rate in Kansas City. Not a lot of people would think when they're walking their dog in the park or they're walking through the plaza with their friends, not a lot of people think this is a dangerous place. People aren't really fearing for their life or clutching their purse or anything like that, because it seems like a pretty welcoming, loving city, and it is for the most part. But a lot of people don't realize that Kansas City is actually one of the most dangerous cities to live in the US, and it has been reported for many years. We are right behind St. Louis, actually, who has also been high on that list for plenty of years. Now, why is this? Why are we on this list? There are several reasons that I can't even all go into, because just like a lot of issues in America, it's not a cut and dry situation. It's not a here's the problem, oh, here's a solution. There are so many things that go into it. Now, as a lot of you know, poverty is an issue everywhere, pretty much in the US. There's poverty everywhere. It's really unavoidable right now. But I personally believe that has a lot to do with the murder rates in Kansas City. Now, according to Data USA, there are about 481,360 residents in Kansas City. 55.6% of these are white, 28% are black, and 12.6% are Hispanic. Now, that being said, Kansas City is mainly comprised of white people, and then there's some black people following after that, and then Hispanic and other ethnicities. Now, where are these people living? Well, rural areas are typically housed and lived in by white people. There are, of course, black people and other minorities that are living in these rural areas. But who are you seeing in inner cities? Who are you seeing living on Troost and Paseo and Independence Avenue? Who are you seeing? It's mainly black people. Now, why is that? Why do they choose to live in a place that is known to be full of violence? Well, a lot of the times they don't have a choice. So, this is something that a lot of people choose not to pay attention to, but black people do not make as much as white people, and that is a proven fact. There are a lot of wage gap differences. It's been known for a long time women don't get paid as much as men do, and that's something that we're actively trying to fight for. Now, black people do not make as much as white people. In fact, in 2016, it was noted that the average European American nurse in Kansas City made around $53,000, while an African American nurse doing the same exact thing made under $50,000. Wage gaps such as this make it harder for African American people to be able to afford living in these nicer, safer areas. It's obviously it's not fair. If you're doing the same amount of work, you should be getting paid the same. Now, it's also a known fact, or it may not be a known fact, but it is true, that black people end up paying more than white people would for living in the same areas. There's really no reason for this. That's kind of just how it is, and just another reason why it's, why aren't we talking about this? This is something that's really kind of messed up and something that should absolutely be talked about. Now, another thing that I did want to discuss that I found to be very, very interesting. Now, I am a psych major. I plan on going to grad school eventually, and so this is something that really interests me, but I have never learned about it in any of my classes before. But there's something called the strain theory, and now this theory was derived from a sociologist named Robert Agnew. And Robert Agnew described the strain theory as being the idea that people become pressured by societal factors such as lack of money or lack of education to commit crimes. Now, this makes a lot of sense. I've known of this for a while. I just didn't know that there was an official theory about it. So Stephen Barron from Queen's University actually wrote an article finding the relationship between employment and Agnew's strain theory. And he wrote that strains and Strains that threaten core goals, needs, and values are seen as central and more likely to provoke a criminal response. Now, this obviously applies to poverty. If someone is struggling with money, they are more likely to commit crimes because they are under the societal pressure to be able to provide for themselves, to be able to provide for their kids, everyone else in their family. And when you don't have as much money, you can't provide for yourself when you have kids, when you have a wife or a husband or someone that you are trying to provide for. It's harder when you're not making as much money. So people of color, minorities, Black people, Hispanic people, these people are under this societal pressure to provide for their families, to be able to afford all these crazy things, their taxes being taken out, all this stuff. They're supposed to be able to pay all of this off and then still be able to, be alive. You can't work yourself to death. So that's just something that I found to be really interesting, that I didn't think a lot of people knew about. But the strain theory is something that is very applicable, especially to what I am talking about tonight. Another issue I wanted to discuss was abuse, actually, victims of abuse. Now, what does this have to do with murder? A lot, actually. It's kind of, I was discussing with a police officer, I know, Officer Johnson, about monkey see, monkey do. When you're raised around an area that is full of violence, if you're watching your mom get beaten by your dad get beaten by your mom, or if you're just around any kind of abuse, whether it's verbal, it's physical, it's sexual, if you are experiencing it yourself from someone, you could go one of two ways. You could either seek the help you need, get therapy, or a lot of times, unfortunately, you go the other route and you follow in the footsteps of whoever you grew up around. You grow up doing what what you were taught, whether they meant to teach it to you or not. And it's a pretty sad reality, but it's very true that a lot of kids are abused. In fact, in a study, it was found that childhood abuse in Kansas City was around 39% sexual mistreatment, 28% physical abuse, 23% emotional treatment, maltreatment, and 3% medical neglect. It was also stated that in 2010, there were around 56,897 reports of child abuse made in Missouri. And of those reports, 7,676 were made for the Kansas City metro area. So a lot of those are being reported in these inner cities. It's going hand in hand with poverty. There's a lot of abuse happening in these areas, and these kids that are kind of helpless, they're just around it and they're seeing it. What are they to do? So it's kind of hard for you to move forward when that's what when you're used to seeing your dad beat your mom or your mom beat you. You just kind of grow up thinking, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. I'm supposed to hold this power over my child. And yeah, it's a pretty sad reality. So also, there are plenty of resources in Kansas City for kids to report their abuse, but the issue is that a lot of kids are afraid. Sadly, even if they are being beaten by their parents or step-parent or something like that, they don't want to see their parent get locked up. They don't want to be separated from their parent because that's who they know. So a lot of times kids are not wanting to report the crime because they're afraid that they're going to be separated from their parents or something could happen. And sometimes these crimes are reported, which is a good thing. But the goal is to kind of get kids to be able to speak up more, So I think that there needs to be more resources in schools. I think that there needs to be just easily attainable resources for kids that need that help. Now, lastly, what I wanted to talk about, which is a very big issue in Missouri, is the education system. The education system in Missouri is terrible. It's slowly kind of getting better, but it's not up there. It's not high. In fact, author Ed Finkel wrote an article about the Missouri school district, and he reported in 2012 that the average ACT score for Missouri students was a 16.5, with the highest score achievable being, a 36. That's pretty bad. I personally got a 24 in the ACT, which is a little bit above the average for my high school, which was a 21. But 16, it's less than half. So now that's for Missouri as a whole, but Kansas City is a big portion of that area, and that's something that needs to be fixed. Now, obviously, it's an issue that inner city schools are not receiving the same amount of treatment that suburban schools are getting. It's a lot of it is government funded, and we already know that they don't get a lot of money. It's just a proven fact. In fact, I was speaking with an officer. His name is Officer Johnson, and he told me on a phone interview that I had with him, he has been an officer for 20 years, or he is a retired officer now, but he had been an officer for 20 years, and he had researched and been involved in, not involved, but has had reports of personally dealing with over 1,000 homicides in Kansas City in his time of being a police officer. And when I asked him what he believes the issue for these is that there's a lack of education. That's what he said straight off the bat, is there is a lack of education in these people that are committing these crimes, and a lot of these crimes are drug related. He reported a lot of people are fighting over drugs, drug deals and stuff like that, and also a lot of people are on drugs when they are committing these crimes. Now, this also goes back to poverty. A lot of people sell drugs to earn money and other things like that, but it's just a really, really messed up situation where it's hard to keep these kids in schools when they aren't receiving the proper education that they need. It's really poor education that these kids are receiving, and it's really not their fault. There are some programs such as Head Start and other things that are trying to help these kids kind of be successful in school, but overall it's just a big issue that needs to be fixed. It's really sad that this is happening, and that Kansas City is such an awesome and welcoming place, but that there's such a dark side to it that people don't know about. It's really sad, and I hope that there can be an end to it soon, and that we can get on kind of fixing these issues. So, thank you.